Imagine this: you're standing in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, the hum of 100 voices blending into white noise. Everyone around you seems alive, connected, present. Yet you feel nothing. Not anger, not joy, not even boredom, just a strange, hollow distance, as if you're watching the scene through frosted glass. You smile when expected, nod at the right moments, laugh on cue. But inside, a voice whispers something unsettling: I don't belong here. And then comes the guilt. Because you should want this, shouldn't you? Connection. Community. The warmth of being surrounded by others. Society has taught you that isolation is a symptom of failure, that withdrawal signals something broken inside you. The most successful people, you've been told, are those who network effortlessly, who thrive in crowds, who draw energy from others like plants absorbing sunlight. So why do you feel the opposite? Why does every social gathering leave you drained, every surface-level conversation make you want to retreat into silence? Why does solitude, something the world labels as loneliness, feel more like home than any party ever could? This is a journey into the psychological, philosophical, and emotional depths of human nature, guided by the reflections of Arthur Schopenhauer, perhaps one of the clearest thinkers to ever examine the silence of the human soul. If you stay with me until the final insight of this script, I promise that you will understand not only why brilliant minds tend to isolate themselves, but also why this tendency may reveal something essential about your own inner world. The last revelation is the most powerful of all, one that has the potential to transform the way you see relationships, success, purpose, and even your identity. You do not want to miss it. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video. Tell me in the comments, do you feel that the more you grow, the less tolerance you have for superficiality? Your response may uncover clues about your own psychological and philosophical development. Here's the paradox that haunts the most perceptive minds: the deeper you think, the lonelier you become. The more you understand, the less you fit in. This isn't a flaw. It isn't antisocial behavior or emotional dysfunction. It's a pattern that has repeated itself throughout human history, a phenomenon Schopenhauer recognized with brutal clarity. Intelligent people don't escape social life because they hate humanity. They escape because their minds operate at a frequency the world cannot match. Arthur Schopenhauer argued that most people's energy is directed toward external distractions, crowds, noise, entertainment, the constant need for stimulation. All of these serve as shields to avoid confronting the deeper layers of the self. He believed that the average person is not interested in introspection because it requires courage, and clarity for many is frightening. Meanwhile, those who possess a more refined intellect naturally take a different path. Instead of running away from themselves, they feel a magnetic pull toward solitude. But why? What is it about intelligence, true, probing, relentless intelligence, that makes ordinary social interaction feel unbearable? Why do the sharpest minds in history, philosophers, scientists, artists, visionaries, so often retreat into solitude? Why did Isaac Newton disappear into countryside isolation to birth modern physics? Why did Nikola Tesla spend endless nights alone, building entire machines in the silent theater of his imagination? Why did Nietzsche wander mountain paths in solitude while writing thoughts that would shake civilization? Were they running from something? Or toward something the rest of us cannot see? Consider this: what if social life as we know it, the endless small talk, the performative friendships, the exhausting dance of pretending, isn't actually connection at all? What if it's distraction? A carefully constructed illusion designed to keep us from confronting something far more terrifying: ourselves. Schopenhauer believed most people fear solitude not because it's empty, but because it's full of truths they're not ready to face, thoughts they're not equipped to handle, questions that have no comfortable answers. And here's where it gets disturbing: what if the inability to be alone is actually a sign of inner poverty? What if those who constantly seek crowds, noise, validation, and distraction are not socially gifted but psychologically desperate, running from a void they refuse to acknowledge? Conversely, what if those who withdraw, who choose silence over noise, depth over breadth, are not broken at all but simply awake. Think carefully about your own life. How many of your friendships are genuine, and how many are just habits? How many conversations stimulate your mind, and how many leave you feeling more alone than before? How often do you perform a version of yourself that isn't real, simply to avoid being misunderstood? And most importantly, when was the last time you felt truly seen by another human being? If these questions unsettle you, you're beginning to understand what Schopenhauer knew. Intelligence doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you experience reality itself. And that shift, invisible to most, is exactly why the brightest minds feel like strangers in their own species. But this is only the beginning. Because what we're about to explore goes deeper than social preference. It cuts to the very core of human existence, identity, and purpose. It reveals why some people are built for solitude, why that solitude terrifies society, and why the answer to this mystery might transform everything you thought you knew about connection, meaning, and the nature of your own mind. Their minds are too active, too curious, too complex to be constantly immersed in environments filled with superficial talk, emotional volatility, or empty interactions. Solitude becomes the space where their thoughts can breathe, expand, and evolve. But here's what society refuses to acknowledge: this isn't a choice born from arrogance or misanthropy. It's born from incompatibility. Schopenhauer goes further than most dare to venture. He says that intelligent individuals do not escape society out of superiority but out of fundamental incompatibility. Their inner world is simply too rich, too layered, too demanding to constantly adapt to the expectations, rhythms, and superficial demands of social life. While most people seek stimulation from the outside, entertainment, gossip, validation, noise, the deep thinker receives stimulation from the inside. The everyday conversations that many find sufficient feel like sandpaper against the mind of someone whose consciousness is always questioning, analyzing, dissecting, observing. This explains a pattern that has haunted history's greatest minds. Friedrich Nietzsche described solitude as the environment where the strongest spirits are forged, where weakness burns away and clarity emerges. Albert Einstein often chose to walk alone for hours, disappearing into silence to think without interference. Carl Jung emphasized that the deeper one's inner world becomes, the more necessary solitude becomes for psychological balance. These individuals were not antisocial. They were simply operating at a frequency that the majority cannot tune into, and refusing to lower that frequency just to fit in. Think about yourself for a moment. Have you ever been in a room full of people, surrounded by noise and conversation, yet felt completely disconnected? Not because the people were bad, but because the interactions felt shallow, repetitive, predictable, like watching the same play performed by different actors wearing different masks. If you have experienced this sensation, you may already understand what Schopenhauer described. Intelligent people are not bored because they think they are above others. They are bored because their minds crave depth, meaning, and authenticity, and most social environments offer none of these things. Another crucial point Schopenhauer raises cuts to the heart of why intelligent people guard their energy so carefully: the weight of cognitive and emotional labor. Social interactions, even pleasant ones, require tremendous emotional and cognitive effort. For people who think deeply, this cost is exponentially higher. Their capacity to absorb stimuli is intense. They notice tone, subtext, contradiction, emotional undercurrents, unspoken tensions, and therefore their exhaustion afterward is also intense. This is why many choose smaller circles, shorter interactions, or carefully selected environments. It is not a rejection of humanity. It is a form of self-preservation. Solitude gives them access to something precious and increasingly rare: uninterrupted thought. The space to examine life without noise. To observe themselves without judgment. To create ideas without interference. To think thoughts all the way through instead of fracturing them into socially acceptable fragments. Schopenhauer believed that solitude is the homeland of originality, and modern psychology supports this with striking precision. Studies from researchers such as Mihai Csikszentmihalyi show that solitude facilitates flow states, creativity, and internal clarity. Neuroscience suggests that the default mode network, responsible for deep thought, introspection, and imagination, becomes most active when we are alone and undistracted. But here's the hidden problem society refuses to confront: we have built a world that punishes depth and rewards performance. We celebrate extroversion, constant connectivity, relentless productivity. We pathologize solitude as loneliness, introspection as overthinking, silence as social failure. We have created a culture where being alone is seen as tragic, where needing space is interpreted as emotional damage, where preferring your own company suggests something is fundamentally wrong with you. And so intelligent people learn to hide. They perform sociability when required. They smile through shallow conversations. They pretend to enjoy gatherings that drain them. They adapt, compromise, dilute themselves, until one day they realize they've lost something essential. Their authenticity. Their peace. Their connection to the inner world that makes them who they are. This is the trap Schopenhauer warned against, the slow erosion of self that happens when you constantly prioritize social acceptance over inner truth. And once you see this trap, you cannot unsee it. You begin to understand why withdrawal isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Why solitude isn't loneliness, it's liberation. But the consequences of this realization run deeper than anyone expects. What happens when you begin to see through the performance? When you recognize that most social interaction is theater, scripts memorized, roles assigned, authenticity optional? The consequences are profound, silent, and irreversible. Because once you understand what Schopenhauer observed, once you feel the weight of operating at a different cognitive frequency, you cannot simply return to the shallow end of human experience. You are changed. And that change reshapes everything. The first unseen consequence is perceptual isolation. Modern neuroscience reveals that people with higher cognitive sensitivity experience stronger activation of the prefrontal cortex during social situations. This means they process far more information, emotional nuance, environmental detail, tonal shifts, contextual layers, than the average person. While most individuals navigate conversations smoothly, moving from topic to topic with ease, deep thinkers are simultaneously interpreting tone, intention, context, energy, contradictions, and unspoken messages. Their minds absorb everything. Every micro-expression. Every inconsistency. Every gap between what is said and what is meant. This intensity comes at a devastating cost: rapid mental fatigue. It's not that intelligent people lack social skills or dislike human connection. It's that their brains work overtime in social environments, processing layers of reality others don't even perceive. Imagine attending a concert where everyone else hears melody, but you hear every instrument separately: the bass, the drums, the violin, the breathing between notes. Beautiful, yes. But exhausting. This is why intelligent people often prefer one-on-one conversations, long reflective discussions, or meaningful silence instead of large social gatherings. They are not avoiding people. They are avoiding cognitive overload. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said that the crowd is untruth, not because people are bad, but because depth cannot survive in noise. This resonates deeply with Schopenhauer's belief that truth grows in isolation, like a seed that only sprouts in fertile, quiet soil. But here's what most people miss: when you operate at this level of perception, you don't just tire faster. You also see things others are blind to. You notice the emotional turbulence beneath polite smiles. You sense the hidden resentment in casual remarks. You recognize the performance anxiety, the insecurity, the quiet desperation people try so hard to mask. Research in personality psychology, especially studies based on the Big Five model, shows that individuals high in openness and introversion tend to have more vivid inner experiences. Their emotions are not superficial. Their reflections are not brief. Their insights are not momentary. Everything inside them runs deeper, lasts longer, means more. And when your inner world is this intense, loud environments and rapid social exchanges feel like interference rather than connection. Ask yourself this: how many times have you been in a social setting where something felt off, even if everyone else seemed comfortable? How often have you sensed hidden tension, emotional imbalance, or unspoken resentment beneath the surface? Many intelligent and sensitive individuals pick up on these layers immediately, involuntarily. And because they perceive more, they must process more. This is another reason why they retreat. Their empathy and intuition, although gifts, can drain them completely if they are not careful. Schopenhauer captured this perfectly when he wrote that solitude is the natural refuge of the mind that sees too much. For him, the ability to enjoy one's own company was not just a sign of intelligence, but a sign of inner richness. Meanwhile, the constant need for distraction was a sign of inner poverty, a desperate attempt to avoid the terror of being alone with one's own thoughts. But here's the second unseen consequence, and it's even more isolating: the erosion of shared reality. As you grow intellectually and emotionally, as your capacity for depth expands, you begin to realize that most people do not share your concerns, your questions, your observations. What fascinates you bores them. What troubles you seems irrelevant to them. What you consider essential, they dismiss as overthinking. This creates a strange kind of loneliness, not the absence of people, but the absence of resonance. You can be surrounded by others and still feel utterly alone because no one is operating on your wavelength. Viktor Frankl emphasized that meaning arises in silence, reflection, and self-confrontation. The more meaningful your inner world becomes, the less dependent you are on external noise. But this also means the gap between you and the average social experience widens. You outgrow conversations that once satisfied you. You lose patience for drama that once seemed important. You withdraw from environments that once felt comfortable. Not because you've become cold or superior, but because you've evolved beyond them, and they haven't evolved with you. This brings us to the third consequence: social misunderstanding. Society tends to equate sociability with happiness, extroversion with confidence, and constant interaction with emotional health. So when intelligent individuals withdraw, they are often labeled as distant, cold, aloof, or too serious. What many fail to realize is that withdrawal is not rejection. It is self-preservation. It is the mind protecting itself from environments that demand too much adaptation and offer too little nourishment in return. The tragedy is this: intelligent people often want connection desperately. They feel deeply. They love intensely. They care with a kind of awareness that makes every relationship significant. But precisely because they experience connection so profoundly, they are also more easily wounded. They feel when someone is not present. They feel when conversations are empty. They feel when authenticity is missing. And once they feel it, they withdraw, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The world interprets this withdrawal as dysfunction. But what if it's the opposite? What if the ability to step back, to choose solitude over performance, to protect your inner world from contamination, what if that's actually the healthiest response to an unhealthy social structure? But solitude offers something most people never discover. And understanding what that is changes everything. But what if everything you've been told about solitude is a lie? What if the very thing society has taught you to fear, being alone, stepping back, choosing silence over noise, is actually the doorway to freedom? This is where the rebellion begins. Not against people, but against the invisible chains of expectation, performance, and shallow connection that have kept you exhausted, drained, and disconnected from your true self. Schopenhauer understood something radical, something that challenges the foundation of how we're taught to live. Solitude is not only about protection. It is also about freedom. Intelligent people value autonomy deeply. They want the freedom to think without interruption, to create without judgment, to observe without being pulled in every direction by social demands. Social life, with all its expectations and obligations, often limits this freedom. In solitude, they experience a kind of mental expansion that is impossible in crowded environments. Ideas connect more naturally. Inspiration flows more freely. Their creativity awakens. Neuroscientists studying creativity have found that the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for imagination, introspection, and conceptual thought, becomes most active when we are alone and not engaged in external tasks. This means that solitude literally activates the biological foundations of deep thinking. The very structure of the mind rewards intelligent individuals for seeking quiet. No wonder so many philosophers, artists, and innovators described solitude as essential, not optional, for their work. But here's the rebellion: you must stop apologizing for needing space. You must stop pretending to enjoy interactions that deplete you. You must stop feeling guilty for preferring depth over breadth, quality over quantity, silence over noise. The world will tell you that something is wrong with you. That you need to put yourself out there more. That you're missing out on life. That isolation will make you bitter, lonely, or broken. But these are the words of people who fear their own company, who cannot sit with their thoughts for 5 minutes without reaching for a distraction. The truth is this: what they call loneliness, you call clarity. What they call isolation, you call freedom. What they call antisocial, you call selective. And there is nothing wrong with being selective about who has access to your energy, your time, your inner world. In fact, it is one of the most intelligent things you can do. Consider the great minds who rebelled against social expectation and embraced solitude as a tool. Isaac Newton retreating to the countryside during the plague, where he formulated the foundations of modern physics, not despite his isolation, but because of it. Nikola Tesla spending countless hours alone in his laboratory, constructing entire machines in his mind before ever touching a piece of metal. Franz Kafka describing the necessity of inner stillness to produce true literature, writing some of humanity's most profound work in solitude. These individuals were not anomalies. They were following the same pattern, the natural pattern of minds that operate beyond the ordinary. But rebellion requires more than understanding. It requires action. It requires you to reclaim your relationship with solitude. Not as something to endure, but as something to cultivate. Here's how. First, reframe solitude as a practice, not a punishment. Stop seeing time alone as something that happens when social plans fall through. Instead, schedule it intentionally. Protect it fiercely. Treat it as sacred time where your mind can roam freely, where thoughts can develop without interruption, where you reconnect with the parts of yourself that get buried under social performance. Second, become ruthlessly selective with your social energy. You do not owe everyone access to you. Not every invitation deserves acceptance. Not every relationship deserves continuation. Ask yourself, does this interaction nourish me or drain me? Does this person see me, or do they see a version of me I perform for their comfort? Do I leave this gathering feeling energized or exhausted? Your answers will reveal which connections are genuine and which are simply habits you've outgrown. Third, embrace the discomfort of being misunderstood. People will judge your withdrawal. They will call you distant, antisocial, cold. Let them. Their interpretation of your choices says more about their relationship with themselves than it does about you. The philosopher Lao Tzu once wrote that those who understand others are insightful, but those who understand themselves are wise. Intelligent individuals seek relationships where both forms of wisdom can coexist. If someone cannot respect your need for solitude, they cannot respect who you actually are. Fourth, use solitude as a forge for self-knowledge. Psychologist Rollo May, one of the great existential thinkers, wrote that individuals grow when they confront themselves directly. Intelligent people grow faster because they spend more time in the depths of their own psyche. Solitude becomes a form of emotional maturation. It strengthens self-control, resilience, and inner stability. It makes you less dependent on external validation and more anchored in your own values. In quiet moments, confront your fears. Reflect on your desires. Understand your pain. Decipher the meaning behind your experiences. Do not run from yourself. Explore yourself. This is why intelligent individuals often appear calm, focused, unusually perceptive. Solitude has trained them to think before reacting, to understand before judging, to observe before speaking. They do not fear silence. They use it as a tool. And in a world full of noise, those who master silence naturally rise above. But the most powerful shift happens when you realize this: solitude does not diminish your ability to love, connect, or participate in life. It enhances it. When you return to the world after spending time alone, you return stronger, more grounded, more authentic. You connect with intention, not obligation. You listen with presence, not distraction. You love with depth, not fear. You offer the world the best version of yourself, not a depleted, performed, fractured version, but the whole, clear, centered you. The rebellion is not about rejecting humanity. It's about rejecting the shallow, exhausting, performative version of connection that masquerades as community. It's about building a life where solitude and connection exist in balance, where you engage with others from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, where your relationships are chosen consciously instead of accepted passively. And once you embrace this rebellion, once you stop apologizing for who you are and how you operate, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeking approval. You stop performing. You stop exhausting yourself trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for minds like yours. You step into a different way of being, one where your depth is not a burden but a gift, where your solitude is not isolation but sanctuary, where your intelligence is not a curse but a compass guiding you toward truth. But there is one final revelation. One deeper truth that Schopenhauer understood about intelligence and solitude. And it changes everything. Imagine for a moment that everything you have learned so far has been preparing you for a single profound realization. One that Schopenhauer considered essential for understanding not only intelligence but the very structure of human existence. Throughout history, the greatest minds did not simply escape social life. They ascended toward something higher. And now, in this final revelation, we explore the deepest truth of all: solitude is not a retreat from the world. It is an evolution beyond it. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that solitude is the natural climate of brilliance. It is where the mind becomes free from the expectations, noise, and illusions that shape society. But more importantly, he believed that solitude is where intelligence transcends the ordinary limits of human perception. To him, solitude was not just a preference or a personality trait. It was the birthplace of clarity, originality, and wisdom. And modern research continues to confirm what he understood intuitively, that silence and isolation unlock cognitive capacities that often remain dormant in constant social interaction. Think about this idea carefully. When intelligent individuals withdraw from society, they are not running away. They are stepping into a dimension where their minds can expand without interruption. They gain access to deeper creativity, sharper intuition, more precise self-awareness, and a more authentic understanding of the world. Solitude becomes the forge in which their thoughts are shaped, strengthened, and purified. It is not an absence of life, it is life at its most concentrated, most potent, most real. But here is where the truth becomes almost unbearably powerful: solitude does something even more extraordinary than enhanced thinking. It reveals truth. Schopenhauer argued that truth is often incompatible with society because society is built on appearances, roles, and expectations. To see reality clearly, one must escape the collective illusions that shape human behavior. Solitude strips away these illusions. It allows the individual to question social norms, examine beliefs without bias, and perceive the world with unfiltered clarity. This clarity explains why intelligent individuals often feel out of place in social settings. They see contradictions others overlook. They sense manipulation, insecurity, or dishonesty immediately. They recognize the absurdity in behaviors most people accept as normal. Their solitude has sharpened their perception so finely that ordinary interactions can feel like performances rather than genuine exchanges. They are not being judgmental. They are simply seeing what is actually there, and most of the time, what is there is a carefully constructed facade. Yet here is the paradox that reveals the ultimate truth: solitude does not make them antisocial. In fact, it often makes them more compassionate. Understanding themselves deeply allows them to understand others with greater empathy. Recognizing their own flaws makes them more tolerant of others' imperfections. Observing human nature from a distance helps them see the suffering, confusion, and longing hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Their solitude becomes a source of profound humanity, not detachment. They withdraw not because they lack love for people, but because they love truth more, and truth requires distance to be seen clearly. Psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the pioneers of humanistic psychology, described how people constantly adapt their behavior to gain acceptance. For someone with a deep intellect or a sensitive mind, this adaptation is not just uncomfortable, it is a betrayal of self. Schopenhauer believed that the presence of others can easily distort one's authenticity because the social world expects conformity. Away from imitation, comparison, and social pressure, the mind returns to its natural state, observing, questioning, expanding. And in that state, it becomes capable of insights that would be impossible in a crowd. But now we reach the central revelation, the deepest truth of all. The insight that Schopenhauer considered the ultimate understanding of solitude and intelligence. Intelligent individuals withdraw from society not because they dislike the world, but because they are preparing to offer something greater to the world. Let that sink in. Solitude is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of purpose. It is where ideas are born, where creativity awakens, where truth emerges, where the soul is refined. And when these individuals return to society, even briefly, even reluctantly, they bring with them insights, innovations, perspectives, and wisdom that elevate humanity. Every advancement in philosophy, science, art, and culture has come from someone who dared to step away from the world long enough to see it clearly. Isaac Newton's isolation during the plague gave birth to calculus and the laws of motion. Nikola Tesla's solitary nights in his laboratory revolutionized electricity and wireless communication. Friedrich Nietzsche's mountain solitude produced philosophy that continues to shake civilization's foundations. Franz Kafka's lonely nights of writing gave us literature that captures the absurdity of human existence with devastating accuracy. These were not people escaping responsibility. These were people fulfilling a deeper responsibility, to truth, to clarity, to the advancement of human understanding. Solitude, therefore, is not an escape. It is a contribution. It is the incubation chamber where the future is conceived. It is the quiet space where noise transforms into signal, where chaos becomes clarity, where confusion crystallizes into understanding. The intelligent person who withdraws is not abandoning humanity, they are doing the sacred work that only solitude allows. They are thinking the thoughts that need to be thought, asking the questions that need to be asked, creating the ideas that will reshape how we understand ourselves and our world. And here is the final, most powerful realization of all: you do not need to apologize for your depth. You do not need to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that cannot hold you. You do not need to feel guilty for choosing solitude over superficiality, silence over noise, truth over comfort. Because what you are doing in those quiet moments, when you sit alone with your thoughts, when you question everything, when you explore the depths of your own consciousness, is not selfishness. It is soul work. It is the work of becoming fully yourself. And the world desperately needs people who are willing to do that work. Schopenhauer understood that the ability to be alone is not just a sign of intelligence. It is a sign of courage. Because solitude forces you to confront everything you've been running from, your fears, your failures, your questions without answers, your longing for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. Most people cannot bear this confrontation. They fill every moment with distraction, noise, activity, anything to avoid sitting with themselves. But you, if you have felt the magnetic pull towards solitude, if you have experienced the strange peace that comes from being alone with your thoughts, you have already demonstrated a kind of courage most people will never possess. And now, as this journey comes to an end, I invite you to reflect on what solitude means in your own life. Do you use it to recharge, to think, to grow? Do you feel that isolation sometimes brings clarity no conversation could ever offer? What truth about yourself emerges in your quietest moments? What have you discovered in silence that noise could never reveal? Because here is the ultimate truth, solitude is not loneliness. It is the space where your greatest self is born. It is where you shed the performed versions of yourself and meet who you actually are. It is where your mind expands beyond the limits society tries to impose. It is where you remember that you are not broken for needing space, you are awake. You are not antisocial for choosing depth, you are discerning. You are not lost for walking alone, you are finding your way. The most intelligent people throughout history understood this. They withdrew not because they hated humanity, but because they loved truth. They chose solitude not because they were afraid of connection, but because they refused to settle for shallow imitations of it. They walked alone not because they were running away, but because they were walking towards something the crowd could never reach. And so the question is no longer why intelligent people escape social life. The question is, what will you do with the solitude you've been given? Will you waste it apologizing, or will you use it to become? Will you let others convince you that something is wrong with you, or will you recognize that your depth is a gift? Will you continue performing for audiences that will never truly see you, or will you step into the quiet space where your truest self waits? Because in the end, solitude is not isolation. It is initiation. It is the doorway only the most perceptive dare to cross. And on the other side of that doorway is not emptiness, but everything, clarity, purpose, truth, freedom, and the unshakable knowledge that you are exactly who you were meant to be. This is why the most intelligent people escape social life. Not to run from the world, but to find themselves. And in finding themselves, they discover something powerful enough to change the world.